Okay, 1:31, we'll convene the Mendocino Council of Governments to order. Call the roll.
Director Scalamini?
Here.
Director Stransky?
Yes.
Wasserman?
Here.
Ranachek?
Here.
Krosky?
Here.
Jackman?
Yes.
And Jurdy. Chair
Here.
Jurdy.
Okay, the first item on our agenda is election of officers, chair and vice chair.
I'm sorry, I also forgot. Chimolino?
Here.
Sorry. All right, the first item on the agenda is the annual election of officers. And this is that first meeting of the calendar year that we have the election. And there is no written procedure in our bylaws or policies, so traditionally we've used Robert's Rules of Order, so that's what we've been doing. If that's all right with you, I'll go ahead with the usual process. So first I'm going to ask for nominations for each office, and then that does not require a second, and then we'll want a motion and vote on each of those offices. So to begin, it's good to see you all back here again. I'd like to ask for nominations for the office of chair.
I'd like to nominate Dan Jurdy to continue as chair.
All right.
I'll second that.
Anybody else? Okay. Not hearing any further nominations. The nominations are closed. Now I'd like a motion and a vote to make that official. So.
I want to see the look on his face first. Okay, so I'll move that we nominate Dan for another year as chairman.
I'll second.
Thank you. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none. Dan Jurdy is re-elected as chair of the Mendocino Council of Governments. Thank you. And now I would like nominations for the office of vice chair. And as you can see from your my written staff report here, it's been Director Stransky for the past year.
I won't want it. I don't want to do it again. I've got too many things going in the city.
Sounds like somebody was checking in there. Do we have a nomination? Was that Steve, maybe? Or you've nominated yourself. Either way, we hear a nomination. Are there any others interested?
Didn't hear it.
Okay. Hearing none, I'll close the nominations and ask for a motion and a second to elect Director Stransky to vice chair.
I won't do it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I heard you say you were willing to do it. Well, I apologize. I apologize for that. So you do not want to continue, so now we need somebody new. We need a volunteer.
We almost got away with it.
No.
Okay, so nominations are open. Anybody willing to serve? You want to do it?
I'll do it if nobody else wants to.
Okay. That's generally what happens.
That means you have to be here.
And so basically, you know, if the chairman's not here, you've got to lead the meeting, and also you'd be automatically on the executive committee.
That's fine.
And those meetings are once or twice a year. We look at things like the budget. So.
That's fine.
All right. Okay, so we've got a self-nomination from Director Chimolino.
Give a second.
And so I don't hear any other nominations. Let's have a motion on that one then.
Okay. Motion, Mr. Chimolino be elected to the vice chair position.
Okay.
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
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 And hearing no objections, Director Chimolino is the vice chair. Well, thank you very much for bearing with us on that.
Okay, now we're going to convene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, immediately recess and reconvene as the Policy Advisory Committee. And first item on the agenda is public expression on items that are not on the agenda. Do we have any public comments on items that are not on the agenda? Okay, we're going to, we have a community member here that former county supervisor who needs to go to another event. So I'm going to move item 7, which is consideration and discussion of State Route 1 traffic issues in Elk. Item number 7. We'll go with that first.
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the council, you have a staff report regarding this. Somehow I remembered that someone said about a year ago, well, let's just bring it back a year from now. I don't think I saw it reflected in the minutes, but there have been some things that had happened since these issues were brought to our attention. You should have my staff report in there, along with some colored copies, I think, of some of the photos that that the ex-supervisor had forwarded to us that he wanted to talk to you about. And I would like to highlight some of the things that have happened since then. And you know, one of the issues was a kind of a resyncing of the radar feedback signs that are in position. I guess they still are today. And there was one for northbound traffic advising of the current speed limit, and it was brought to our attention that it was rather ineffective because it was down near the Philo Greenwood intersection, down in a gully down there, and it would be more effective if it were located close to the top of the bluff where you're approaching downtown Metro Elk. So in looking at that, I had recommended that Caltrans also put another one up the other side of the elementary school, similar type of facility, and get agreement with the state that they would do that. And they had some in stock, but they ran out and they had to resupply and get some, and I was told that they would be installed pretty quickly as soon as it, I think they're in the shop in Eureka. Rex could address that as well here in a second. The other thing that has happened since last year, I know that one of the issues that Mr. Duvall had brought up was the lack of what he called congestion problems, and I didn't call it that. I call it a parking issue because a lot of the people that are in the area were parking in the paved out sections in downtown Elk that were paved by Caltrans up to pretty much the limit of their probably prescriptive right-of-way. But a lot of people have been using it for parking. Some of that, I think, was exacerbated because of downtown, for some construction activity was happening a year ago. I saw a lot of construction vehicles parked there, but it is an issue. And for what are you going to do with that limited right-of-way? Are you going to use it for parking, or are you going to use it for pedestrians and bicycles and people moving around in the community? So it is an issue. One thing that has changed since then that MCOG applied for and got funding for actually a pedestrian and crossing inventory, 2 different types of funding sources, but for the entire county, which includes a number of locations in Mendocino County in unincorporated areas. One of them that we called out was Elk, and of course the cities as well. And we are going to be meeting tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock to go through the consultant selection process. So that will be forthcoming pretty quickly. So we're going to be looking at just pedestrian crossing and pedestrian improvements, poor sidewalks, lack of sidewalks, and try to prioritize those and have them, when this study is all and said and done, which probably won't be happening for a year and a half, have enough information regarding what needs to be done, the scale of the project. Is it sidewalk? Is it filling gaps? Is it access a transit stop? Is it on a safe route to school? So they'll all be prioritized for a number of ways, and come up with a number of projects in all 5 jurisdictions that we pretty well ready to go ahead and seek grant funding for implementation, probably under the active transportation program that has received a huge infusion of state fundings because of Senate Bill 1, and this will make all 5 entities put them in better position to be have projects that would be eligible for funding. So all prioritized. So those are probably the two big things. You know, as far as a little community in this county, parking is an issue in a number of areas. I don't know what to tell you about that. We are a transportation agency, and you know, the lack of parking facilities has issues with the transportation element, but that usually involves land use decisions that are being made and funding, different types of funding that we don't have access to, and I don't even know where to get it. But it's an issue obviously in Elk, and it's also an issue in Wallala that because we are going to be removing some of the on-street parking with the improvements that will add for the first time some pedestrian and bikeway improvements in the town of Elk. So that's all I have to tell you right now as a preface, unless Rex would like to update you on the availability of those radar feedback signs.
Yeah, I could add a couple things, I guess. I can confirm that the hardware for the radar feedback signs is at the shop and will be installed shortly. They just wanted to double check and make sure that we have all of the locations for the sign installation correct, just to be certain that they're going in the right place. We're also going to be relocating the existing sign that's south of town, as Phil mentioned. And I will also add that the situation with parking, parking seems to be an issue in every community, from the very smallest to the very largest. And it seems to be a big issue from the very smallest community to the very largest community. So it's certainly something that the communities have to take into consideration, especially when there's a limited amount of space, a limited number of streets. And you know, we have on Route 1, we have what we refer to as multi-use shoulders in many locations. In areas where we don't have dedicated sidewalks, the shoulders are used as a shared facility for pedestrians and bicycles. And when there's room, motorized vehicles sometimes will choose to park on the shoulder as well. I think generally, if it can be done safely, it's usually permitted unless it's specifically prohibited. So yes, I think from the perspective of the resident down to the smallest community, certainly parking can be something that's on their mind.
Regarding the parking, it's if you think about it, it's not going to do any good to put up a no parking sign. You're not going to get any enforcement there. It's state right away. The CHP has other things to be doing. So unless there's any questions in asking for this item to be moved up ahead of the other item, Mr. Duvall would like to speak. I told him we had limited time. He assured me he was just an elected person, not a lawyer.
Thank you. Norman Duvall for the record. I want to thank Caltrans. I want to thank the highway patrol, although they're somewhat invisible in Elk, for what effort that they can have in the town. Just a little bit of a heads up of the future is that both Harbor House and the Greenwood Pier will be opening full on in 2018. State Parks is going to, not immediately, but soon, bring in the rest of the mechanics for the Iron Ranger to enable, to collect fees for parking opposite the store. Rather than pay the fee, people are going to park on the street, on the highway, and avoid that until there isn't any more room on the street, on the highway, for parking. You can walk into the park without paying a fee. But you can't park in the parking lot without paying a fee. BLM, Bureau of Land Management, Department of Interior, has secured an office in the museum, and they are going to consider this the gateway port for the California National Monument, Coastal National Monument, and that will draw a number of additional people into the town of Elk. In addition to that, State Parks is going to put a publicly accessible hospitality bathroom just opposite the post office with a parking area there, somewhat to invite people to come to Elk. And that's, as far as I know, one of the few public bathrooms on Highway 1 in Mendocino County. I would like to draw your attention, and then I'll be done, to this photograph, which is duplicated, and point out to you that on the lower right-hand corner of the of either photograph begins the parking area for Harbor House. It has a dozen rooms, and there are a couple of residences north of that. The school is just around the corner, and when I was here last year, there was some discussion that there would be a walkway, not just in the in what we consider a bikeway, but between the White Line and where people used to be able to walk with the drain culvert that took up much of the 2017 construction year. That depression, which is on just to the right of the highway, is a good 30-40 feet deep. And a person who walking to the school, either you cross the highway to avoid this access to the 40-foot drop, and then cross the highway again to get into the school, which is also on the west side of the highway. If there was any possibility of some kind of a walkway on the west side of the road around this curve, so most people will walk on the west side of the highway. That's where the beach is, that's where the school is, that's where the Catholic Church is, would be of great benefit. It's a work in progress. There's a lot of change that's happening, and a lot has happened, is underway now, and I thank you for your time, effort, consideration, and the effort that the COG has put together. Thank you. If you have any questions.
I just have a question for Phil.
Yes.
Based on your comment, the consultant that will be selected to work on the South Coast Plan, would this be the kind of thing that they would look at for recommendations? I mean,
Yes.
Okay, because I was kind of envisioning, you talked about walkway, which I think was
Yes.
probably precise language because you didn't say sidewalk, and I think maybe the rural nature of Elk, maybe in this case, the sidewalk might not be the right application, but maybe crushed granite with some kind of railing to prevent someone from going over the cliff. But it seems like that kind of a detail could be something that could be proposed.
That's the kind of thing that I would expect we'd look at. I mean, but the last thing I'd want to do is put crosswalks, and especially in that school area, having kids crossing back and forth on the highway. It is a state highway, and there's people approaching sometimes too fast, and we want to avoid crossing at all costs.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay, now we're going to go back to number 6, which is the Technical Advisory Committee recommendation of the January 17th, 2018, which will be a public hearing.
Did we do public expression?
We did.
We did? I missed it. Sorry.
It was quick and quiet.
Consideration and finding of negative declaration. So I guess the first question is, do we have proper notice for the public hearing?
Yes, and I have the proofs of publication that are listed in the staff report.
So we're seeing proof of publication for the Willits News, the Independent Coast Observer, and there was one other paper there. Ukiah Daily Journal. No Fort Bragg Advocate News?
No.
And so does someone want to make a motion that we have proper, do we need to make a motion for proper finding, or just we acknowledge that there is proper notice?
I don't know if you actually need a formal motion and vote on that.
Okay.
But you need to somehow make a finding that there was proper notice.
Okay, well, I think we're all seeing that there was notice
Okay.
in those papers.
So I have a number of items that I need to pass out. Do you want to pass things out? So they need,
3 separate ones?
no, there's four things here, and then I think 4 items in the stack.
Okay, don't keep me busy.
And for clarifications, there are copies of those for members of the public, I assume?
Yes, there will be. There should be enough for board members, staff, and then a few extras as well. Is this on? Okay. So, this is a public hearing and consideration of adoption of the 2017 Regional Transportation Plan and negative declaration. So we've already made the finding of proper notice, so I'll be giving a summary of the staff report as well as the comments that we have received. And then we will be opening the public hearing to take additional comments. Following the public hearing, we'll be taking action on, or making the appropriate findings for the negative declaration. And then there is a resolution for adoption of the RTP. So, the Regional Transportation Plan is our primary transportation planning document. It is a 20-year document, and it includes all modes of transportation within our region, including state highways, local roads, active transportation, transit, rail, aviation, and maritime. And it also has a section addressing transportation issues specific to tribal lands. For all of these modes, the RTP assesses needs. It includes goals, objectives, and policies, and it includes an action plan of projects that are typically divided into a 10-year short-range time frame and 20-year long-range time frame, and then also contains a financial element. And then, as I mentioned, an environmental document has been prepared separately. So the RTP has been developed over approximately the last year and a half with public involvement through workshops and surveys, agency input, including local agencies and state, as well as tribal governments. Our technical advisory committee has been extensively involved, and the Social Services Transportation Advisory Council has provided input and feedback as well. So an administrative draft of the Regional Transportation Plan was presented at our Technical Advisory Committee in September, and after receiving feedback from the TAC. The first public draft was presented at the MCOG meeting in November. After comments received on that draft, we produced a final draft, which was released for the official public review, 30-day public review period per CEQA, along with the draft negative declaration. The review period ran from January 4th through February 2nd. The Technical Advisory Committee considered the final draft RTP at their January 17th meeting. They did make a couple of modifications to the plan at that meeting, which were then included in the draft RTP that you received in your packet. Those changes that were made by the Technical Advisory Committee were to modify the language included in the policies and objectives regarding climate change and the environment to better reflect the current efforts of the region as far as implementing electrical vehicle charging stations and the appropriate involvement between private and public sector in that network. So those changes are reflected on pages 18 and 19, and that was in the draft in your packet. During the public comment period, we've received 4 sets of comments. We received comments from Caltrans, State Parks and Rec, Brook Trails Community Services District, and from Hal Wagonette. So Caltrans, and you are receiving copies of all of the comments received in the handouts right now, along with some other changes that were not, some proposed changes that were not included in your packet that I will be summarizing. So the Caltrans comments included some minor corrections and clarifications and updated grant program information. Also requested an enhanced discussion of climate change impacts, and I'll explain those. And then requested updates to the Regional Transportation Plan checklist, which is a document that's required by Caltrans accompanying the RTP for review. So the changes to that checklist will be made when we submit the adopted RTP to Caltrans. But the changes that were made based on the Caltrans letter can be found on page 12 in what was just handed out. The greenhouse gas emissions discussion previously focused primarily on what the county's efforts, the region's efforts as far as reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but there wasn't enough about what is being done to address the impacts that have already been experienced. So the subheading was actually changed to greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. There was some further information added on SB 32, and then on page 15 in the handouts that you just received, there was a discussion added regarding the efforts to adapt to climate change. MCOG participated in an adaptation study a couple of years ago that identified potential pilot projects, and it's anticipated that more things of that type more studies of that type will probably be needed in the future to address climate change. Sorry, I am
confused.
Yes. Okay. There should have been a handout of goals and policies. Did you have one? Do you guys have a handout that shows changes to the goals and policies?
I don't think so.
So our handouts are pages 12, 15, 59, and 224,
Okay.
124, 123.
Okay. So, no, that's not it. Nope, I have that. Okay. So there was also I apologize for not having this handout. There was also a change proposed to the goals and policies in the, on page 18 of your document, the policies on climate change and the environment. And it was to add an objective on page 19, along with 2 policies that would support pursuit of planning efforts to further look into adaptation strategies. So those were in response to the Caltrans comments. In addition to the Caltrans comments, we received comments from State Parks and Rec. The comments expressed support for inclusion of the McCarricker State Park Hall Road Repair and Enhancement Project, with State Parks listed as an implementing agency, so they were pleased to see that included. And then another comment from them was regarding the aviation element. One of the long-term and ongoing efforts for the regional airports are to establish clear zones around approaches and runways. And State Parks and Rec pointed out that Van Dam State Park is adjacent to the Little River Airport, and which does include pygmy forests, and so they encouraged airports in developing environmental documents for any sort of brush clearing program to include consideration of those pygmy forests in that effort. We do not propose any revision to the RTP based on that comment because it does already explain that specific airport improvements would be subject to their own environmental review, and so we were in agreement but don't feel that didn't make any revisions based on that. Another set of comments that was received was from the Brook Trails Community Services District, which I'll just summarize. Phil is going to address these comments further when I'm done with the summary. So the comments from Brook Trails focus specifically on second access to Brook Trails, as well as a bicycle and pedestrian trails connecting Brook Trails with Willits. And I did address both of these issues in my staff report. This was one set of comments that had already, well, we'd seen draft comments at the time of the staff report, and so these were addressed. So the Brook Trail Second Access Project is included as one of 3 primary unfunded needs in the local streets and roads section of the RTP. However, Brook Trails felt that this they wanted a greater emphasis placed on the importance of this project. And although we are aware that there is a renewed interest in the project at the county level, we do believe that at this time that section is the appropriate place for that project to be listed. It's there with a couple of other projects that have that are needed for similar reasons to the Brook Trail Second Access Project. The other item of concern with Brook Trails was the multi-use trail. Although there is a multi-use trail identified in the action element, in the action plan of the active transportation element, there's not a specific route identified for that project. Just that there is a need for a project to be pursued. The Brook Trail CSD has expressed that they would like the Willits Creek Trail identified as a specific project. However, MCOG feels that it is best as it is currently listed. It allows the flexibility for that route or another route to be explored if the county chose to implement a project in the future. And then the last set of comments that we received were from Hal Wagonette, and Hal's comments were also regarding the second access to the Brook Trails area. They encouraged remaining silent on funding of the Brook Trails second access and establishing the priority of the project, and in the future identifying only full transportation options in future study of the project. So that's my summary of all of the comments that we've received and the changes that have been proposed in response. And now I will turn it over to Phil to further address those comments. Then following that, we'll be opening the public hearing.
Okay, I'm going to kind of summarize the comments submitted by the Brook Trails Board, and to a lesser extent, there's some of those comments that seem to be echoed by Mr. Wagonette. I want to point out that the opportunity to comment has been available since I think the end of October. We wanted to close this out and adopt in December. And I received 6 pages of comments on the last business day available prior to this meeting on Friday. And I could probably spend 5 pages rebutting every one of those 6 pages, but we don't have time for that. I'm going to kind of summarize, what needs to be done. Before I get into this, I just want to say we need the second access to Brook Trails. There's no doubt in my mind. When I first came here, I learned of it back in the 80s, and it was because of really emergency ingress and egress. That's what it was. By the mid-90s, found that there's been enough development up there that, and with the low capacity of that county road, it was some kind of a trail in the past, we also need it for transportation and safety purposes as well. So fully supportive of it. However, I need to talk about responsibilities. Cities are responsible for their city streets. We all know that. County is responsible for county roads. Everything in and out, including the entire street area of Brook Trails, is a county road. State highways is primarily the responsibility of the state of California. But Senate Bill 45 was signed by the governor October 10th, 1997, which kind of changed things. That's known as Senate Bill 45. And what they did was they gave this agency and those regional transportation planning agencies around the state the ability to have access to state funds under one condition. They say, well, you can go ahead and use it for any transportation purposes you feel fit, as you see fit, whether it's on a county road or city street or anything. But you need to take care of the state highways in your area. And if you have capacity projects or operational projects that need to be funded, you need to use those shares to leverage the funds that may be available from the state of California to alleviate the problem. So guess what? We spent $45 million approximately of our funding that we had available through the State Transportation Improvement Program on the Willis Bypass, and that was our share. It was a small share of the entire project. That's where a lot of those went. So we do have a a responsibility for certain aspects of the state highway. We've invested with our funding at least 4 prior planning projects related to the second access, going back to the first one I can think of, 1994, which was a funding study that we did that essentially looked at, well, how are we going to ever get the money to pay for this thing? And the results of that study indicated with a recommendation that brook trails, at least for the short-term needs, they should be doing some kind of assessment on those properties to come up with money that would pay for the oncoming improvements. It couldn't all be done just based on the county. And for the long term, they should be considering traffic mitigation fees within the Brook Trails Township for new development to pay for other things and cumulative effect that are sure to come in the future. That was 1994. I went to a meeting that Mr. Wagonette said was happening at Brook Trails, and they're going to be talking about the second access, so I went up there. I didn't realize when I went up there they were talking about, the discussion was for comments to our regional transportation plan, but I thought it was because of what 2 supervisors sitting here are working on right now, but didn't realize the focus was on the RTP. So to characterize my response is the comments that we received from Brook Trails Board are not well received. Not at all. And I'll tell you why. Number one, the focus of most of the comments that have been received are misdirected. The comments seem to indicate, if you read them, that we have some kind of responsibility for the second access. The responsibility lies in this room, and is not on Mondays at the first day of the month. It is on Tuesdays. And the board of directors, since we're dealing with county roads, the board of supervisors is a responsible political entity to make sure this thing happens. And I'm certainly encouraged that we've got this thing back on track, and the 2 people that are on that committee are here. But to have comments directed at us that we are supposed to be doing this and this and this, and that we're supposed to concern about the language that we put on our regional transportation plan, is really misdirected, because we put actions in there and things that we believe are going to happen. There are also several inaccuracies included with these comments that I would suspect that they should have known better, is what I'd say. One of them is saying that we administer the active transportation program for Mendocino County. No, we don't. California does. The California Transportation Commission has that role. We have no role in doing that. There's also suggesting that we program planning dollars in the regional transportation plan. That's not where they're programmed. They don't belong in the RTP. That's just a couple of examples of the gross errors. I know that Nafili was talking back and forth with the Brook Trails director over the last day, and I think they came up with 6 iterations based on things that we called their attention to of what their comments are. I think I could find more. Other comments reflect a lack of understanding of the regional transportation plan as a document, its process for development, and its function. It lists projects. It lists things that people have agreed upon are going to happen, and with some semblance of a fact that of assurance is going to happen in the future. The regional transportation plan, according to the guidelines, is fiscally constrained. We just don't we can mention pie in the sky projects, but the ones that are in there need to be things that have been agreed upon, and there's some kind of agreement amongst the responsible agencies that we're going to do this. What the second access needs is a consensus on the purpose and need, the funding partners, and the direction from the county to proceed to the environmental phase. We were almost there about 4 years ago, and it got way off track, and they diverted from the purpose and need of the project. The purpose and need is twofold. First, that very important emergency ingress and egress route that started all this many decades ago, and now because of development over time and the fact that Brook Trails is going to need that road improved to handle more people in the future. And they can't even solve their water problem until they have a better access. And so probably the last of the 4 bullet points is that I believe some of the comments that were forwarded on by Brook Trails are downright offensive. Couple of examples. Well, number one, in there you'll read that because of what the Board of Supervisors did in derailing the study, it says here that this agency, Mendocino Council of Governments, punts on all project for the Sherwood Road corridor. Now, almost all the comments involve 2 things: the second access, which I totally agree with, and the Willets Creek Trail. And it notes that we aren't promoting the Willets Creek Trail. I've already mentioned that we helped with 4 separate related studies to these alternatives, and there's 3 other people in this room right now who were there when I spoke before the Board of Supervisors against the action they were bound to take regarding the alternatives. What we did was, way back in some of these planning studies we did in the past, we did one with a company called KOA that was the first looking at the alternatives, and we made progress, and there was a lot of information generated. And for one reason or another, the indication from the county is, well, let's do more. Maybe they didn't like the answer, I don't know, but let's do more. So we went back and helped fund a second study, and that was the Drake Hagelin study a few years later. And we got better information, better validation that what the preferred routes should look like. But in both of those studies, they said no to what was known as Alternative A, which was a direct route down to Highway 20 down the ridge, which is a great route if you're just considering emergency egress. It's a direct route on Highway 20. You can get rid of people, but out of harm's way, but it has very little use for, or utility for ongoing traffic, people who want to get to the freeway and most directly and into Willets. So had very little use, and therefore that was not recommended. So we had 2 studies. Both of them said no, if you're truly sticking with the purpose and need, don't go that way. You need to go, here's some alternatives to go directly to the east, tie in to that new bypass, and so that people don't have to go through Willets if they're on their way to the job in the morning in Ukiah or somewhere south. So in two different consultant studies that we paid for, that recommendation was there. And like I said, there's 4 people in this room that should remember what I said, and I said, don't do this because it's not consistent with the purpose and need. And furthermore, it was, to my amazement, it was brought out during that meeting that part of the motivation was that a landowner who one of the routes was penciled in on his land had been sending letters to the county threatening a lawsuit if we punch that particular alternative through his land. Well, all we were trying to do at the time was to complete the feasibility report and identify routes for further consideration. Now, I gotta admit that that route looked pretty good. It seemed, on paper, it looked great as a way, as one of the best ways to provide access that would address both aspects of the purpose and need. But we were, at that time, several years away from completing an environmental document. And the environmental document may have just eliminated that route anyway. So we didn't know what we were talking about. But on paper it looked good, just like a lot of things look good on paper. So, but what we need to do is adopt the plan that included the routes that we needed to study. But it came out, it was, you know, the supervisor for the area at the time decided the best way to eliminate the threat of lawsuit, at least the amount of papers from lawyers that were flooding in, is to eliminate that route from further consideration and then add further damage by saying, even though we've been told twice that A isn't the one, let's put A back in there as an alternative, because it does serve a good route for emergency egress, and it is one of the cheaper ones. But as I pointed out, has very little utility for transportation, day-to-day transportation between Brook Trails and Willits. So then I see in the Brook Trails comments that we're doing a disservice to them and we're not highlighting it enough. Well, we don't write fantasy in the plan. We write reality. Here's where we're going. It hasn't progressed this far enough. So that's why we have received a bunch of negative comments regarding this. I guess we were supposed to write some flowery language in there, like the sky is always blue, which unfortunately it is right now. and there's no problems, and there hasn't been any there's no problems with the concept. I tell you, it's really bothersome when there's people in this room who saw what I said. I was trying to fight for them making a mistake. I don't want to be preaching here, but early on, when I was a young engineer, way back in the mid-70s, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was tell the city council what needs to be done and show them the evidence for that decision to the best of your knowledge. Don't ever make it easy for them to make the mistake by choosing the wrong thing. Don't make it easy. If they want to do it, you salute, move on, and mitigate it. I don't even think mitigate was a term back then, but you do the best you can. And I just saw that it's time to make a stand and then have an agency that's involved who knows, they should know, that we are not the entity that makes these decisions. But I was trying to force the right decision and then be castigated in writing by an agency who should know better that we're not doing enough. No, we did what we can. Now, I'm getting close. Then the other big part of the comments, most of them were directed about the Willits Creek Trail. Well, I heard about this maybe more than 15 years ago. Somebody in Willits actually held a little committee meeting. I went up there, and what I found was that the Willits Creek Trail was an abandoned rail line. What happens with that is the adjacent property goes back to the original property owners. And what I found was people thought, well, this is really good. We have this right-of-way that's not on Sherwood Road. It's out of the way, but it'll be a good hiking trail between Willits and Brook Trails. So I listened a while and found that, well, it's all in private ownership. And some of those owners were there. And some of those owners were telling us all that, yeah, I have problems there all the time. You're not going through my land. Because there's already people cutting fences and going through there, and there's a couple mattresses in my land right now, and there's needles there. There are empty alcohol bottles, and people have set fires up there. So there is total opposition from what I saw. Not all the property owners were there, but the problems were outlined. There is no public right-of-way for the Willis Creek Trail. And I would bet that you might not ever get it. So there's no right-of-way. And even if you got one, who would own this Willis Creek Trail? Is Willits going to own it? Part of it's in the city of Willits, I believe. The county going to own it? Brook Trail's going to own it? If we did get the money to build it, who's going to maintain it? And then the part that I protest the most out of anything was it implies in these comments that the Willis Creek Trail could be used for students to walk back and forth from Willis and from school in Willis to Brook Trails. Well, the first thing you should know about any kind of a trail, if you're going to put students on it, you have to think about security. It has to be in a visible area that's constantly monitored by traffic going by. And here we have a proposal that says, yeah, it can be used for safe routes to school. I'm saying it's sheer fantasy. Fantasy, fantasy, fantasy. It's not a good idea. And I don't think you're ever going to get the right of way anyway. And I think the least of the problems, now that we have Senate Bill 1 putting money into the active transportation program, the least of the problem is finding money. I think if you can solve those problems, I think we can get it done. But who's going to pay for the maintenance? Who's going to monitor it? And you better not advertise it as safe routes to school. There'd be liability problems. So I think all of those problems need to be addressed. We don't even have a concept now, yet alone a project. We need to understand what the difference is. So, Brook Trails believes that, that there's prejudicial language in here because we're not giving it proper respect. And all I got to do is point out to you on page 45, it's highlighted as one of the needed projects. It's unfunded needed project. And there's only about 3 of those big ones that are highlighted in there. So just remember that the RTP is constrained. It's financially constrained, and it reflects reality. And above all, we're not the decision-making authority who decides whether this project is a go or not. And if you just give me one more minute, I'm going to conclude. I don't mean to preach, but this project's going to cost tens of millions of dollars. Our commitment to the Willits bypass of our share was $45 million. Where are we going to get the political will it takes to fund that kind of thing over a number of years? I doubt it exists. I really do. I didn't get gray hair from standing by while the bypass was built. I didn't get cranky either. I am now. There needs to be political will, and I hope the 2 supervisors can point this out. It's a long-term thing. And what it was advertised now for $22 million will certainly be $45 by the time we get there. And because of some of these things that seem to be misdirected at the wrong agency, because there's so many inaccuracies, I'm not inclined to change my recommendation to make any changes to the RTP based on the comments from Brook Trails Board or even my good friend Hal Wagonette. Silence. I'm done.
Okay, so I'll just quickly conclude, and then we can open it up to, we can open up the public hearing. Then following the public hearing, we can conduct board discussion. So the Technical Advisory Committee, as I mentioned, they did consider the RTP on January 17th, along with the negative declaration, and recommended approval of both of those. And thank goodness for technology, I was able to get from the office the handout that you should have had, and so I will just read to you the additions to the goals and policies on climate change and the environment. So the objective that was added on page 19 is to improve resiliency of the region's transportation system to climate-related impacts. And then 2 policies to support that. Consider grant opportunities that would provide capital or planning funding for projects to identify and implement climate change adaptation strategies, and encourage implementing agencies to consider strategies for climate change adaptation when designing improvements or additions to transportation networks. So those are the additional objectives and policies resulting from Caltrans comments. So that concludes what I have to say, so we could now open the public hearing.
Okay, 2:33, I'd like to open the public hearing. Do we have members of the public who like to speak on the...
Good afternoon, Robert Pinoli with the Skunk Train. I wanted to compliment the staff and consultants for their work on this project. I've reviewed the information, and it's nice to see that there's a more than a mention of rail in this plan. For Mendocino County to continue to be competitive out there globally, and to try to track industry into this county, whether it be clean industry, whether it be timber industry, it needs to identify a mechanism for getting goods and services in and out of this county. Truck is not the answer. There are countless studies that show rail is the answer. We have countless customers who want to come online and ship with us from Fort Bragg to get their goods out to the rest of the world. And we can't do that right now because we, as a common carrier railroad, are denied access by the NCRA's ability to have a railroad functioning up to Willits, which is our connection point. While the Skunk Train is a private enterprise, I want to point out that in 2017 we carried nearly 60,000 guests. The average party or group size was 3.44 people, and folks stayed an average of 2.5 nights. We know that 84% of our guests stayed, which totals just a little shy of 35,000 room nights in this county. The average party spent $668, which means that $10.98 million in revenue were generated by Skunk Train passengers. We're huge to the tourism economy. And as a private enterprise, it's very hard for us to get funds to be able to keep our railroad maintained, to constantly fight the mountainous conditions. But for 133 continuous years, this railroad has continued to serve this county. And I would encourage this board, the staff, to continue to look for ways to better the railroads that we have in this community. It's one thing to put them here in a report, which is greatly appreciated, but action needs to take place. There are funds out there. There are funds that can be got. It just takes a little bit of work. Probably the biggest question that we get is what's going on with Tunnel Number 1. Tunnel Number 1, which is 3.5 miles just outside of Fort Bragg, is currently what's barring us from making the connection between Fort Bragg and Willits. This past fall, we spent $1 million on engineering and construction to rebuild the hillside so that it meets modern day engineering and compaction standards, and we'll see if the engineers are right. We need to let it sit for about a year or two before we can actually put service back through that tunnel. So, you know, tourism is a big part of the economy here in Mendocino County. We just so happen to be transporting a lot of tourists. We have a lot of folks on the freight side that would come online if we had that connection. Please do continue to do work that identifies rail as a very viable means of transportation of goods and services in and out of this county. And again, thanks to the staff and everybody for their hard work on this report. Thank you.
So a question, Robert.
Yes, please.
What's the prospects of NCRA connecting the rail up to Willits?
You know, I can't speak for the NCRA, but their board chair is here today. And I will tell you that the NCRA continues to have it, from my knowledge base, the NCRA continues to have it on their radar screen to make Willits a goal.
Could you please sign in?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you.
I have a question also. You referred to pursuing funding grants, whatever, for this. Who has the ball for that, from your point of view?
I'm sorry, sir.
Who has the ball for pursuing funding that you referred to?
Well, you know, we've had many of conversations with Phil Dow, and Phil has turned over many of rocks. There are plenty more out there that we could, use assistance on. There is a grant administered by the Federal Railroad Administration that is available. It's certainly available to NCRA. It may be available to the skunk. There are grants that do come across our radar screen. Part of the problem is that it takes a robust amount of effort to put one of these grants forward. And these are separate than the funds that come down for railroads are separate than funds that oftentimes come down for highway transportation. They are out there, they do exist.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, board, staff, public. I am Hal Wagonette, and I am going to just briefly respond to Robert's comments here as the chair of the NCRA before getting into your primary topic. The NCRA at its next meeting is going to be reevaluating its state mandated mission in the light of the challenges of the Eel River Canyon. Part of that is going to shift the emphasis in restoring the service from the south, which now exists from the interchange up to Windsor, to the Willits area. That's not a 5-minute project. As you know, in transportation, nothing is a 5-minute project. But that is where our priorities lie. The NCRA board covers 4 counties and has 2 reps from each county plus 1 city, which rotates amongst those counties. They are all elected officials or previously elected officials, or they're appointees. They're responsive to the areas. They know what's going on, and it's a highly functional board. So stay tuned on that. Now to the Brook Trail Second Access. I have to tell you that as a supervisor, I sat in your chairs, and I listened to Phil, and sometimes it was a little more like a sleep aid than actual information. He very seldom becomes passionate and speaks with real emotion about one of the issues, but I heard him today actually keeping me sitting up straight in my chair with some of his comments. And he is irritated, and I am irritated at the political red herrings that took the Brook Trail Second Access in the face of 2 studies that showed where it ought to be and what the priorities should be, off into the realm of somebody's political expediency for no reason that I could actually discern at the time. And I completely recognize his frustration, and I agree with a great deal of it. The comments that you will see from me are more narrative, and you might think of them as a little more emotional than the engineering language that you usually face from this board. But the real emphasis here is to bring to this board to remind you that the Brook Trail Second Access does serve 3,700 some residents of that area and about 4,500 of that greater area. And I believe that they are now, as a result of these recent fires, they are now motivated by their daily situation and that set of occurrences to find the political will to provide some of this funding. You don't have to spend, oh, and by the way, when I first started looking into the Willits bypass, I also looked into the second access, and the local district engineers, not Phil, but the county engineers said, we think we could build that for about $2 million. Well, by the time they got done just looking at it, it was $4 million, and now we're hearing numbers like $20 million and maybe 45 in the future. None of that, I think, is unrealistic or strange. But the proper order of things is to get a plan, do a study, get the information, get the plan, and then seek the funding. Yes, you have to know there's political will for the funding. But the leadership we had in the 3rd District when this came up before sent the thing off into some sort of an alternate reality wearing a cowboy hat. That's no good today. We've had enough alternate facts and alternate realities. What we need is the studies, the information, the decision, and then the funding. And the citizens will support that. So what I am standing up here doing here is to encourage you to reaffirm some of these initial studies. And again, this thing about one of the chief arguments that I heard back there in 2011, was it 2013, somewhere in there?
13.
Yeah, in that area. Started in 2011, ended in 2013. It was always focused on the emergency features. This is a transportation body. You should have a full function transportation solution. Yes, there can be these emergency egress and access, and there's a lot of chapter and verse about how that goes. But you must not be derailed by a priority that is only or that overemphasizes access and emergency services. Your daily traffic is an emergency under the scenarios that we now have, and it really gets poor when you have a snow event, you have a traffic accident, you have a rain event, you have a mudslide, an earthquake, and maybe a fire. Not necessarily all at once, but those are the kind of things that shut down Sherwood Road. And I was born in Willits 1947, and we lived on that road. And I saw it. I didn't see it when it was an Indian trail, and I didn't see it when it was a wagon trail, but I saw it when it was a dirt logging road, and it has eventually become a transportation corridor for some 4,500 people. So it never had the benefit of a design. It was just the accident of geology that gave us the corridor that we have today. On the topic of the safe routes to schools, I did live up there. And at the age of 9, I was granted the privilege of walking to school across those sheep fields. I know that railroad grade. I played there when I was a kid. And me walking across the sheep fields as an individual in the 1950s was a whole lot different from the situation that we have here now, where we have, Brooktails didn't exist. We didn't have 5,000 people up that road. There was 26 families. So it's a whole different scenario. And just because I got away with it doesn't mean that you could turn your kids loose today and think that they would get away from it. That trail does pass 100% through private property owners, and they are not pleased with the way things are now. And I think they would be resistive, as Phil says, to opening it up. So anyway, I want to encourage you to this group has a certain autonomy from the Board of Supervisors, but the Board of Supervisors is the decision-making body as far as some of these priorities, because they own all the roads. And this would be a new road, and the county has not built a new road in probably 75 years, maybe even longer than that, certainly before my time. But the political will, I think, is there, and I highly encourage this group to move in the direction of getting the studies, getting the plan, and then and keeping tabs as you go with the political will. But it's the leadership at the Board of Supervisors that's going to move things. The very fact we have the 2 supervisors here that are on the ad hoc that's going to be looking into this and other transportation areas shows that there is some leadership that is paying attention. We didn't have that in 2013, but we have that now, and I would hope that the successor to Supervisor Krosky is going to carry this particular torch. As a matter of fact, I've spoken to 2 of them, one of them today, who say that that is a top priority for them and that they intend to move it forward. So I hope that the 3rd District is listening, and that anybody who votes will vote for somebody that has this as a priority. I can take any questions you might have. All right. Thank you for your time.
So Hal, I'm assuming you'll be available to speak with Supervisor Krosky and I. I mean, I'm sure you 2 have already spoken, but maybe our ad hoc committee could get together with you and some other people in the Brook Trails area, because obviously one of the issues is the landowner on the we would probably call the preferred route, and
yes,
at least in the past his opposition to that route. So there may be some strategies that could be devised to eliminate that opposition, because that was obviously I think part of the decision-making process of the board to not want to continue to pursue that route.
I think eliminate might be a little bit of a hopeful, overly hopeful word, but perhaps it could be diminished.
Okay.
Good to see you, Steve. I have never met you, but I've watched you from afar. Good luck in your new position.
Okay. Do we have any other public comments on the plan? Okay, well then at 2:48 we'll close the public hearing. Any board comments? Supervisor Krosky.
Thank you. You know, I certainly I think the wording that we currently have in our plan for Brook Trails is adequate. But I hope that the people in Brook Trails and the people in 3rd District still realize that it is a priority. I mean, I think it is a priority for MCOG, and I think it is a priority for the board, as long as we can get a priority for the majority of the board. But, you know, I think that is something we want to move forward with, but it is technically still an unfunded need. It's definitely a need, but it is very much unfunded. But I did have a question about the trail. Is that something that might be able to be incorporated into the second access?
Well, depends on where the second access is. I mean, what we would try to do, I would hope, would to be have enough right-of-way to provide pedestrian and bicycle access along that, and that would be consistent with statewide and our complete streets policy. But that would be something that would be a major priority to do that. Okay. Because if you're going to have kids walking up and down the road, you want them in a visible location. You don't want them off in the woods, especially if they're smaller. So, yes, the answer is yes.
Great.
I would just want to add on to that. So, you know, what Phil said is absolutely right. I mean, any new facility that you're building, you would want to incorporate those things. However, because, you know, it was safe bicycle and pedestrian access between Brook Trails and Willits was expressed as a concern at the community meetings. And so because the reality of how long it takes to get a project like that, a brand new facility, ready for construction, you know, it'd be 20 years from now. And so the county could consider some sort of interim, you know, in addition to incorporating those into a second access, you know, maybe some shorter term interim type improvements could be considered as well.
Okay, great. That was my next question. I mean, is this something we need to pursue a short term, kind of like some of the improvements to the Sherwood Road headed north for emergency access, you know, improvements all before we can finally get around to the second access. So
that should be pursued, and I mean, there's not enough pavement width right now on Sherwood Road for the traffic it carries, yet alone. But hopefully, I don't know what the plan is for their cannabis money, but that would be a good candidate to think about if we're going to be exacting some fees from the growers. That would enhance safety quite a bit. And it's also a recovery area for errant vehicles, but also some wide enough shoulders that people could get off and still be reasonably safe.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the real priorities in our area for the community is this second access. And the brief knowledge that I have on it is that it's a shame that it got derailed along the way, but I think that there's enough interest in it, even in the city of Willits, and especially in the council in the city of Willits, that we will help as much as we can to do that. And I just think that we really need to get going.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what else to say. It's just, I mean, we've got going, and then we've been derailed, but it's just, I just needed to get it back on the road, I guess, or to help get it back on the road. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I comment on that real briefly? It doesn't take much to turn this around. We have almost all the information we need. We just need to take a couple of steps back and look at the realities and look at what really serves the purpose and need and say, yeah, let's pursue this. Let's find some money and do an environmental impact report, or do the environmental study on this alternative, that one, that one, that one. All the ones that meet the purpose and need, and then let the chips fall where they may. Those angry letters from the attorney may come back, but so what? If they want to spend their money that way, fine. But go through the environmental process and find out what's real, what looks good on paper, and then what ultimately doesn't, and then make the best choice. It won't be that hard. The hard part, I think, is the political will. I've been burned. Prove me wrong.
Okay.
I think the challenging part is to come up with the funding. I mean, so the challenging part is to come up with the funding. Now, the good news is that since 2013, SB 1 has passed, and so there is, for the first time since 1994, new money for transportation in California, and that 18 cents a gallon lost half of its purchasing power since 1994, and so this was desperately needed money that's going both to the RTIP and also to the county, but people do need to realize the county has chronically underfunded its roads for decades, and so there's something like $600 million in deferred road maintenance after decades of underfunding of our county roads, and so the county is not really in a position to take its share of transportation dollars and invest that into a new county road someplace when it's still, even with SB 1, will be underfunding the roads. The roads will continue to get worse. We haven't contributed now upwards of $2 million a year of general fund dollars above and beyond historic levels into the road maintenance. It's still not enough even with SB 1. So you referenced the cannabis tax dollars. We have that tax in place approved by voters. We have an advisory measure saying a majority of the funds should be spent on 4 things, including roads. Currently, the county is spending more than 100% of its cannabis revenue on 3 of the 4 items: roads, enforcement, and actually fire and emergency medical response has now received a very small amount of money from the county as well. But again, that's more than, we're spending more on those 3 items out of the general fund, you could say out of the cannabis revenue, than we're actually collecting currently out of cannabis revenues. Now, we may in future years get more money as more people come into the system, but it's not a guarantee at the moment. And there's also not a guarantee on SB 1. There's an active campaign right now, ironically, by some Republican congressmen in California who are afraid that Trump is so unpopular that the only way they can get their voters out to vote is by putting in a repeal the tax measure on the state ballot to try to get their voters out to vote to keep them in Congress, which is kind of sad. But if SB1 does stay in place, then the county will have money going forward to hopefully properly maintain its roads with the cannabis money. But what we really would have to look at is then, okay, how much money will be coming into the RTIP? It will be more or less back to its previous levels, I believe, but it's still, it's a few decades away in terms of how much time it'll take for MCOG to accrue enough money. And then the question is, okay, of the money to accrues the next 2 to 3 decades, what share of that would go to this one single project? So I think there's lots of decisions to be made out here, but I agree. I think the plan is the first step, and then you look for the funding afterwards. I mean, I also agree with your comment that Brook Trails the property owners of Brook Trails are going to need to contribute something, some way to this, because land is improved by public roads. When you have public roads, it becomes worth more. When there are fewer public roads, property is worth less. So effectively, anywhere in Mendocino County where you have these one roads in, one road out, you generally have less expensive land. When you have land that's accessed by a good road network, it's generally worth more money. And so people naturally look for the bargain. They look for the property that has poor access and is worth less, but there's not always going to be an opportunity. There's not always enough public money out there to just solve their problem for them without them participating. So I think it's going to be a long road ahead of us, so to speak, to fix this. But I think the first step is to identify the perfect route or the best route through an environmental impact report.
Well, I guess that's why you get elected chairman, because I agreed with everything you said. And if you noticed, I've already said it once or twice today, why we had extra money because of Senate Bill 1. So every one of us is supposed to be on the campaign trail saying why we have these extra funds that we can do things with. And I understand that you need every bit of the money you get from Senate Bill 1 to maintain the county roads. You're way behind. You need that and more. And probably the last thing that I will say is that I've been involved here with this agency for 30, I don't know, too long, 35, 36, 37 years now, 37 years this year. And, always I talk about how we spend our precious RTIP dollars or our state funds for things. And of course we know where it's gone for the last 15 years, but our debt is repaid. And without Senate Bill 1, we're just going to have minimal funds in the future. But Senate Bill 1 ensures a much larger state transportation improvement program that will provide hopefully ongoing substantial amounts of money to fund projects. And I say we need to use these monies on regional projects. That second access is a regional project. The one right here in this valley, the Ratify Road project, is a regional project. Solving the flooding problem down on Highway 1 in the vicinity of Point Arena is a regional project. It affects large areas of geography, a lot of people. And, I would think that, and I totally agree with what you said about Brook Trails taking it on. They know what they need to do for 24 years. After 24 years, if you've just done something, they would have had several $1 million to get the project moving. So this isn't all a county issue. The Brook Trails Township needs to take responsibility as well. And 24 years, no action. And that's the source of part of my irritation today. And anyway, I agree with everything you said. I think that it would have to be in those looked at with all the other responsibilities around the county. A couple of those projects I already mentioned, and we somehow inherited the access route to Potter Valley Road too. Somehow that became our project because at one time I volunteered our money, and guess what? the county reneged on their commitment of $12 million to the project, or $6 million to the project. As soon as I offered up STIP money, it became my project. There was at one time, I know my staff is just cringing that I bring this up again, but at one time when they wanted it done, the board said, we will set aside $500,000 for 12 years to get this $6 million project done. And guess what? A couple years later, I said, why don't you apply for some STIP money in a competition? I told Bob Parker, we probably have $3.5 million we can get you more than halfway done. So we programmed it. What's the board get offer? You probably wouldn't even know about that, do you? That's why it's time to go. I've been around too long. I know all these previous commitments that the Board of Supervisors has failed to follow through with. And with that, we better check and see if we're going to have this access to this room for our future meetings.
Did you have something else to add?
Yeah, I wanted to echo, I agree. I think the Brook Trails does need to step up and help with some of this. I think it's important that, the county moves forward with that gesture of, yes, we really are going to do the study and move forward with this. And I really appreciate the comments that the city of Willits is also, willing to do what they can to help, because I think an access to Brook Trails does increase spending in town. We can get more building up in Brook Trails. So I think the Willits recognizes that this will also really benefit them. So I appreciate those comments.
Okay, we have closed the public hearing, and we're on the consideration of the negative declaration. We have a proposed finding that there is no substantial evidence that the adoption of the plan will have a significant effect on the environment, and to do that, we could approve the negative declaration.
Yes. I so move.
Second.
That was on the negative declaration?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so you first, so was that for approval, or it was
Yes.
finding that, upon finding that there will be no significant impact?
Okay.
That's what Larry understood, right? That's what you said, right?
We've got a motion and a second.
Okay. So Scalamini?
Aye.
Stransky?
Yes.
Wasserman?
Yes.
Chimolino?
Yes.
Ranachek?
Yes.
Krotsky?
Yes.
Jackman?
Aye.
And Jurdy?
Yes. Okay, and then we have a resolution to, I guess, is it the 2017 Mendocino Council Regional Transportation Plan or the 2018?
It is the 2017, because it is still labeled the 2017 RTP because we had planned to adopt it in December initially.
Could we change it to 2018?
Yeah, we should not.
Okay.
Thanks, Hal. Yes, and the negative declaration that you just approved also
Referenced it as the 2018.
referenced
that
2017.
would be the real problem.
Yeah.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the resolution?
I'll move to approve.
Second it.
Okay. Guess roll call.
Stransky?
Did you say my name?
I'm sorry.
Yes.
Scalamini?
Yes.
Stransky?
Yes.
Wasserman?
Yes.
Chimolino?
Yes.
Ranachek?
Yes.
Krotsky?
Yes.
Jackman?
Yes.
And Jurdy?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe that takes us to our annual committee appointments.
No, that's where we are.
Did we do everything?
What?
Did we do everything?
No.
Huh?
On the RTP.
Oh, Mike Pidd. program.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do we have award local transportation funds 2% for bicycle pedestrian projects?
You have a staff report based on a recommendation. I'm trying to catch up with you.
So we have top 3 ranked projects recommended.
Yes. There's top 3 were recommended. You have a staff report recommending that the funding go to the Branscombe Road multi-use bridge project over 10 Mile Creek in Laytonville. This was a project that we've been trying to get funded for several years now. It has some state funds in there that we were in jeopardy of losing because it was bid before, and just about a year ago, and the bids came in too high and had to be re-advertised. I had to go to the California Transportation Commission and ask for an extension to try to hang on to the funds. I was at the bid opening, which came after the recommendation from the Technical Advisory Committee to commit these funds to this project. And in talking with the county transportation director, they think we're going to be fine. The bid was good. It was under the engineer's estimate, and we think we're going to have this thing up this fall. And the importance of that to the Laytonville community is it just connects so many other investments that in particularly pedestrian and bicycle routes that Caltrans made when they went through there a number of years ago with that beautiful project that they did, and the county did through 2 or 3 different funding sources that we were able to find, and MCOG's own 2% money that went to some sidewalks on Willis down to the school there. So, but it was a real dangerous crossing on that very narrow bridge there with a very rickety, about that foot wide pedestrian path on the side that was totally inadequate, and this will tie all those previous investments together. And I'm happy to report this will give us enough money. We'll probably have some money left over, partially that could go to the second priority project. So I'm urging your support of the staff recommendation and mine.
Okay. So we see the projects. Do we have any public comment on these? Okay. Any board member comment or a motion?
I'll be glad to move the recommended action.
Richie, was your hand waving a second?
I will make that a second.
And that came from the agency that tends to lose on that.
Yeah, but it moves us up.
Yeah, we start over next year. Thank you.
So there was a motion and a second.
Yeah. Scalamini?
Aye.
Stransky?
Yes.
Wasserman?
Yes.
Timolino?
Yes.
Ranachek?
Yes.
Krosky?
Yes.
Jackman?
Yes.
And Jurdy.
Yes. Okay, now we're on the third final item in this section, request for funding for electric vehicle charging station in Fort Bragg.
This recommendation comes from our TAC. It's supported by staff that would provide some funding from my partnership program that we established many years ago that will provide some extra funding that when for partners in resolving a transportation issue. In the city of Fort Bragg, in accepting, I believe, a grant-funded charging station, found that where they wanted to put it didn't make ADA. They came to us asking for, I think, a modest amount of money under the partnership program. The TAC agrees with it and is recommending that we authorize the 12,000, which will match the extra 12,000 that the city is going to spend to make ADA improvements to make that whole charging station work.
I do have a question about that or two. You spoke of it as if it was in the future. When I read this, I got the impression it was already done. The station, the charging station installation.
I think the charging station is in, but it's not accessible. Is that correct?
The county won't final our plan because of ADA compliance issue.
They won't, what, your plan?
They won't final the building permit.
Oh, okay, so it's not done. It's, okay.
No.
And it's a slope issue?
Yeah, the charging station is in, and they requested to have their permit finalized, and they said no because the ADA slope was wrong.
Okay, so the, sorry, it's the land, the land trust put this in?
The land trust was administering the grant for the charging
Yeah.
stations around the county. The grant, I think, went to state parks, right? But then land trust is administering the grant.
I think state parks got the funding and the land trust is the implementing entity.
Okay.
This is very similar to the situation in Point Arena a year ago.
Well, I remember that. Well, that was a location issue, I thought.
Yeah, that was wasn't a yeah, it was moved to Point Arena because of the state park was only open part of the year.
Yeah, it didn't, I mean, it didn't make sense.
And then they didn't have any, and what we funded was the part that, where they can actually collect a fee and not be a burden on the city by providing free electricity. So
Okay. Okay,
it needed extra hardware and software for Point Arena.
Okay, well, on this one,
Pardon me?
somebody somewhere screwed up. I mean, this is, you know, somebody put this charger in without really knowing what they were doing somehow and didn't take care of the ADA stuff.
It does have it.
I can't address that, but probably due diligence was not done at that point.
All right.
But
And they're out of money, I assume? I mean,
yeah.
Well, not every parking space is required to be ADA accessible. So, you know, if you looked at a parking lot, they don't all, most of them probably aren't
Right.
ADA accessible, so.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, the chargers were put where the ADA accessibility
Yeah,
was
they're gonna be accessible. It's just a slope issue, and you know, the story I heard that the county inspector that came through had just come back from training on those type of issues, and first place he went to happened to be Fort Bragg, and so
4%, 0.4% is the grounds off by 0.4%.
Well, that's an expensive 4/10.
So
anyway.
that's one of the, if that's what it is, it's hard to foresee that would have been an issue.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Is there a motion?
Yeah, I'll move the recommended action. Let's
Second it.
bite the bullet and get on with it.
Okay, Scalabrini,
Yes.
Stransky?
Yes.
Wasserman? Yes. Chimolino?
Yes.
Ranachek?
Yes.
Krosky?
Yes.
Jackman?
Yes.
And Jurdy.
Yes. Okay, now we're on to 8, which is consideration of annual appointments to standing committees. The first one being the executive committee, so that now will currently consist of Director Chimolino, myself, and we need a third member to serve on the executive committee for the year. It meets probably 2 times, maybe 3 times a year, generally leading up to budget, and one other time during the year. So does anyone want to volunteer for the executive committee?
It's only a 1-year commitment, I might
promise
add.
not to hold it
He's
right.
looking at me. I've got 1 year left. I'll do it if no one else will. Make the most of my 1 year.
I think as chair I get to appoint, so I'll appoint Supervisor Krosky, Director Krosky, in the executive committee. And then
Does that change the status of anyone else?
well, I think Larry was.
I second it.
Were you, well, I don't know, were you on it?
Yeah, I'm on it, but I don't,
Oh.
I mean, I'm
Do
off
you
it.
want to stay on it?
I don't mind. You can just-
You want to stay on the executive committee?
I don't mind if you're not looking for more stuff
I
to do, and it's not like it's a burden, but.
don't have a huge
Okay.
preference. I was just because no one wanted
Okay,
to. So
if you want to stay on the executive committee.
Sure.
Okay. There you go. You're on the executive committee one more year. Okay, Transit Productivity Committee, which currently it's Sue and myself. Now, I've been on it, but I'm also on the MTA board, and so I think MCOG staff this last year expressed some interest in my maybe not being on the Transit Productivity Committee. So if
There was a case where there was a financial decision, and it was overbalanced 3 to 5, and they, 3 of the 5 members were on the MTA board, and it was money being allocated to MTA. So that
if,
was one
if
case.
someone else would like to be on the Transit Productivity Committee, I don't know, that same issue is going to come up again.
Yeah, it's probably unlikely.
It's mostly reviewing, performance and, and reviewing the transit claim, the annual claim for funding every year, and the unmet needs.
So I'm willing to be on it again, but if someone else wants us to go on it.
They're all jumping.
Okay, well, I'll remain on the Transit Productivity Committee with Sue. Okay.
Okay, so we have the same 2 members?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then CalCog, Steve, you've been the director. Do you want to continue?
Yeah, it's pretty low key, but I'm 50-50. So if anyone else is wanting to do that, fine. But I don't mind continuing.
How often do they meet?
Seldom, but I wasn't wild about going all the way to Sacramento for their meeting and killing a whole day. So and they don't do video. You can't do it remotely like we've done here. That doesn't work for them if they don't do it. And so I don't know if I'm on anybody's list at CalCog, but I'm still not wild about going all the way to Sacramento for meetings for that. So if anyone is interested in that, speak up.
I'm not retired.
I can take that one over if you'd rather, and you stay on the other one. That's fine.
Okay, that's fine with me.
Okay, so Director Krosky, and I've been the alternate. I continue as the alternate because I read the emails and that sort of thing. So Director Krosky and I'll be the alternate.
All right.
Okay.
Could we maybe have just a voice vote for that whole slate, and just since we didn't take any motions or actions. There are 2 of these that are council appointments, so the whole council appoints, and one of them the transit committee, the chair appoints. So.
Oh, okay.
According to the bylaws. So.
I just want to make
a
motion for
formalize that.
This.
Yeah, I can move to approve the appointments.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay. And we don't need a roll call.
Yeah, all those in favor?
Thank you.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you very much.
And the next thing we have is the adoption of the 2018 board calendar.
Okay. This is essentially the same calendar you saw back in December. And based on the discussions with staff and with this group, we decided to remove the transportation tour, the field trip in April, and make that a regular meeting, and leave a placeholder for a September tour with a date to be determined. So.
And April.
April.
CTC.
That's right. Thanks for reminding me, Phil.
I just told you this morning.
I just learned about this morning. Yeah, note to self. So in April, the California Transportation Commission intends to have a town hall meeting in the Lake, Sonoma, and Mendocino County area. We think it'll likely be in Sonoma. We'll see, and the dates, once again, and my calendar is in my bag over there.
I think it's
in the
March
middle of the
11th.
month. Yeah.
And 12th or something like that.
So, in fact, I should
March or
probably
April?
retrieve that right
March.
now.
No, I'm sorry, April. March is next month, huh? April.
So, that's something we'd like to help host, and encourage members to attend. Normally staff attends these. I'm going to get my calendar. Do you have it?
They have town halls around the state. They schedule one in a different area. I think the last one we had was up in Eureka that we went to. I think the feeling went to that, didn't you? Town hall?
That was a few years ago.
Yeah, it was several years ago, but the last one they had was in Chico last year, and it gives the opportunity for the commissioners that come from all over the state to visit an area, and there's time on the agenda to discuss your local issues. You know, such a thing as you had an access route to an area you wanted to improve. You know, you might want to bring it up to them, tell them what you're working on. And
So
what the local
So I've got down April 11th and 12th. Did they make that a overnight for the commissioners and maybe have a reception the night before? And,
yeah, I don't have any
meeting?
idea what's planned,
Yeah.
and it's something we have to get together.
They've saved the date
Is it a Tuesday, Wednesday?
April 11, 12, and that's a Wednesday, Thursday.
Yeah, Wednesday, Thursday. Sounds that
Right.
it's consistent. The commission always meets on Wednesdays and Thursdays, so that it's a hole in their calendar when they don't meet. The agency itself does not meet, but gives them an opportunity to travel around and familiarize themselves with the non-urban areas that they never get to.
So are you suggesting we have a board meeting in April or not?
It's too early to tell whether we need to meet in April as a board, because one reason or another that always seems to be it's too early for the budgets, and we're working on the next year's budgets, and just the cycle of a bunch of different issues, we sometimes don't have enough to have a meeting,
Very often, very often April is a meeting we'll cancel if there's not enough business to bring you all into town here over the hill for some of you. So we kind of wait and see if there's enough business. It tends to be the season we're having committee meetings and fewer board meetings, so we can leave that open and cancel as needed. I like to have the placeholder so that we can reserve this room in case we do meet.
But if we don't, we might be able to offer an opportunity to maybe go to Santa Rosa or something and meet with the California Transportation Commission.
Okay. So I think we understand the April meeting may well be canceled, and but in April the CTC will be meeting in Sonoma, Mendocino, or Lake, and soon we'll hear which of the three.
They tend to come and don't venture very far from where there's
so more likely Santa Rosa
that they can fly into. So my bet is it's going to be in Sonoma County.
Yeah.
We might push for it to be in northern Sonoma County, but that's about it.
Okay. Well, with that information, is there a motion to approve the calendar, the calendar for the year?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
And okay, now we need to recess as the policy advisory and reconvene as the regional.
We have a consent calendar?
Yeah, consent calendar.
Oh, I'm sorry. Consent, yeah.
I just wanted to mention on consent calendar, you have the fiscal audit, the MCOG fiscal audit, which is completed, clean audit. I did not have a chance to get bound copies in time for this meeting packet, and it seems like we're needing fewer of them. So unless one of you wants a copy of your own, I'll make a limited number for the office and have it available electronically. So, okay.
Okay, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
I'll second.
Can we just voice vote?
And we do need a roll call because we have, we're allocating funds on number 13, amendment to the overall planning work program.
Scalamini?
Yes.
Stransky?
Yes.
Wasserman,
Yes.
Jimlino,
Yes.
Ranachek,
Yes.
Krosky,
Yes.
Jackman,
Yes.
and Jurdy.
Yes. Okay, now we're going to recess this Policy Advisory Committee, reconvenes the RTPA, and do we have a motion to ratify our previous actions?
I'll move to ratify them.
Second.
With great enthusiasm.
Voice votes, okay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, now we're on to reports, informational reports. Not an MTA report at the moment.
We received word this morning that Carla could not make it today.
Okay. North Coast Rail Authority, Loretta, do you have any?
Is she still here?
On CTC, Phil attended the NCRA item at the CTC meeting.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. I'll just repeat that for the microphone. The only thing I had to report is that a couple of the board members from NCRA attended, and as well as their director, an item report to the California Transportation Commission. I believe it was on January 31st. I was in attendance in Sacramento. They had the CTC, California Transportation Commission, had asked them some time ago to come back with a business plan. They did not come back with a business plan. They came back with kind of a strategy document, and was told by the commission that they need to keep working on a business plan to show how they're going to stay in business in the future. After several speakers, the staff action was, the action of the California Transportation Commission was to form a staff subcommittee to work with the NCRA to ensure that they get a product which the CTC would buy into. So it's back to staff to work with the NCRA board of directors.
Did you hear a rough timeline for when they're going to come back?
No, I didn't. You know, they're unfortunately the executive director of the California Transportation Commission has the softest voice in the world, and I couldn't hear what she said, and this is reality. And then everybody, all the NCRA people walked out, and I had an upcoming agenda item, and so I didn't go talk to them. They fled town, so no, I don't know.
Okay.
I plead ignorance.
Okay,
But she really does. She talks like this to the microphone.
Okay.
We don't have that problem here.
Okay, we have also the MCOG staff summary meetings. We have that in our packet. Is there anything you want to highlight?
No, I don't have anything to highlight. Just trying to show you we're working.
Okay, administrative staff verbal reports.
Nothing to add. I've been kind of preoccupied lately. Planning staff?
I noticed also that there's included in the package was a before and after study that my office put together for the Willits bypass. It's pretty brief and not terribly shocking in terms of some of the findings. But I just wanted to mention that I think the TAC was scheduled to have a presentation on it by the engineer who was in charge of it, and he was unable to make it to the last TAC meeting. So I think we're going to make arrangements to have him present to the TAC. And if there's any follow-up conclusions or anything, we'll probably bring those up with the board. But I don't think it's anything surprising.
Did you say that that you had the engineer for that was over the Willits bypass make a presentation to the TAC group?
The engineer who worked on the study that's included in the board packet which is a study of the conditions before and after, basically looking at the traffic conditions in Willits and through the use of the bypass in its initial months after being opened.
Okay.
Any questions on that? I'm sorry to butt in, but I did notice
Does that
was
exist
included.
somewhere?
Like,
Are we going to see that eventually?
It's in the info packet.
Yeah,
It's in here?
Should be.
that's where I saw it.
Okay. Maybe I missed it.
If you printed the 53-page one, it's not in that. It's in one of the other.
Oh, one,
things that's
okay, there
attached.
were several
Oh
other.
yeah,
It's
there was
in
a
the
there was a
information.
second
Yeah.
mail that had a bunch of informational
Mhm.
documents.
Yeah, there was like
Yeah.
half a dozen
Yeah.
other
It's
things
in
I
that
did
one.
not put on. Thank you.
Maybe if there are questions about it at the next meeting, I can address those. Or if there are questions now, I can try it as well.
Okay.
We can follow up and make sure it was sent to you.
It was, it's in the info packet.
Well,
It was, okay.
I'll look for it.
All right.
And as he stated, it was pretty succinct. I think there was not a lot of shocking data in there. Less accidents. You know, traffic is being diverted. So.
Yeah. We got, before this, you had about 22,000 vehicles per day in parts of downtown Willits. When we knew that the throughput on the other side to the north was about 7,000, so it's not shocking that we relieved about a third of the traffic.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that we've known forever that Willits generates a lot of traffic on their own with only one north-south connected street. Pretty much what we expected to see.
Yeah, and it probably will change a little, very small amount in the longer term, and we'll be looking at that as well, coming back to it in a few years.
I just wanted to add that I had asked the Mendocino County Air Quality provide us information regarding the air quality monitoring station in Willis, because I'm very interested in seeing the change in the past year. But he up and retired, so I don't know who even the new guy is.
The new girl.
New girl.
Lady,
That's- That's a woman down. This
It
is the
is.
place on Gobi Street.
Yeah, Barbara.
Right.
Yeah.
No, yes, it is.
Yeah,
They're still there.
There's a she there now. That's.
Okay, well, thanks for that. Loretta, were you about to?
Okay, well, Phil did refer to, during the ELK discussion, the grant that was awarded, so I wanted to report on that. We had advised you that we submitted a grant for a pedestrian facility needs inventory and engineered feasibility study. So we were recently notified that the grant award that we requested of $179,229 was awarded, and our local match, which we just programmed on the consent calendar, our local match was $23,221. So that total project was $202,450. And as I believe we reported last month, we, with concurrence of Caltrans, have combined this grant-funded portion of the project. So the grant-funded included the three cities, Ukiah, Willits, and Fort Bragg, and the north inland part of the county. But the part of the project that's funded in the work program is the Point Arena and South Coast portion of the project. So we have one large project with two components. Part of it's grant funded and part of it's funded in the work program. And as Phil mentioned, we went out for bid and we received 3 proposals. So those are currently being reviewed, and we hope to have a consultant on board in the next few weeks to begin that project. I just wanted to report on that successful grant.
Thank you.
Okay, good. And now we're on. So I guess we're on to directors' reports. Any reports from directors?
Over there.
You got a hand?
I'd like to take a minute to update people on progress of something I mentioned might be a few years ago, and that is the issue of upgrading existing ADA ramps versus using the funding for other ramps. I heard yet again last week that the city of Ukiah is working on the assumption and the belief that when a street is repaired, resurfaced, other than just a coating, whatever you call that, slurry seal or something like that, that they do have to upgrade existing ADA ramps, and apparently cannot use the money, the equivalent money elsewhere to put ramps in where they don't exist at all. That still just absolutely fries my patience that law apparently exists. And so I will probably be in touch with, I forget your name, I'm sorry, Caltrans, about that. I mean, that is a state law, which as far as I can tell doesn't make any sense. And between, you know, us and the two representatives at the state level that I have contact with locally, if that's really the way it is, you know, I want to see that fixed, and I'll just keep people updated as whatever happens, happens. But
as I recall, after you mentioned it, I guess it was a year ago.
Yeah,
now,
about a year ago we had
I did
brief communication.
bring it up with our Division of Local Assistance, the District Local Assistance Engineer, and she essentially confirmed your understanding that yes, if you are if you do have a project that you know, there is a threshold, but basically if you are doing work at an intersection, that you are required to upgrade the ADA facilities to current standards.
Yeah.
So
I forget
it sounds as if you do have a purpose.
Yeah, I mean, I got a, you know, well, I got a bug somewhere that, you know, I won't describe, but I mean, it doesn't make any sense. You know,
you can contact me later, and I'll put
Yeah.
you in touch with those folks if you. If
I
you'd
don't
like.
know if it's state law or policy inside any of the organizations that give grants to cities to do stuff. You know,
I
get lost
think
in
it's
details,
tied
but-
to funding, to
Yeah.
you know, where the money is coming from.
That's what I heard the other day. It's not just if California gives the funding, but if you get the funding from elsewhere, you still have to
a lot of
follow
the
this.
money has some component that's federal, and a lot of those federal regulations get passed down for us to enforce effectively.
Okay. So I'm never sure what the limits are, what we can do up here, but from my point of view, and what I see as rational or nonsense in this case, if somebody can produce a disabled person for me that will stand up and say, yeah, I'd rather see an existing ADA ramp made perfect than put one in a block away where they've got to go around, you know, I'll give you $100. It just, you know, does not make sense. But anyway, I will continue pursuing that and let anybody know, you know, what progress I might make.
I think the issue here is that it's expected that is going to be a component of any type of improvement project, whether it's just, you know, repaving the street and whatever like that. That probably, I don't know that would preclude your entity from applying for some of our 2% money to use those funds where you're not improving the whole street, but just to upgrade by adding ramps on a high volume facility that you're not improving.
And you're not improving?
That you're not otherwise improving the street.
Oh,
you're
right.
just adding the ramps.
Yeah. I mean, how else are ramps going to get put in this day and age? You know, more of them throughout a city. You know, the kind of funding for that is not easily available. So I should mention this, what I have in mind. I mean, I'll give you an example. So currently, some of you know what Measure Y is. And that's Ukiah's half-cent sales tax for street improvements that was passed a year ago.
Right.
So we had a report on that last week. And the money for this coming year will be in the range of $3 million. And so there's some streets targeted for reconstruction, whatever it is. And the number of ADA ramps that are on those streets is 35. And it's about $10,000 per to upgrade them. So there's $350,000 that is targeted to be spent on making existing ramps perfect. instead of putting in ramps where they don't exist. And I just, makes no sense to me. So, but that's an example of, you know, the money involved. And it's a $3 million budget, so there's like 10% of the budget is going to something that, you know. And what I wanted to say a moment ago, I'm thinking whatever the law says, what it ought to say is that you know, that the equivalent money can be spent on ADA ramps elsewhere, maybe at least to a 90% figure, with up to 10% on sidewalk improvements, because it's the same disabled people with some of our sidewalks that are going to care about those improvements. So that's, you know, I don't know how to make that happen. I don't have a magic wand to wave to change the law, but that's the thinking behind it right now in my mind. So,
well, out of your own local funds, I don't know why you couldn't just dedicate part of those funds you're receiving with your taxes towards a program to put them where you think they're needed on streets that are not scheduled for rehabilitation.
I should probably talk with you about that separately then. The Measure Y funds are dedicated for street improvements strictly. I don't know if that would include sidewalks.
It depends how your ordinance, how your initiative was written.
Yes,
because
it
we
does
wrote ours that it had to be used for streets or alleys.
Okay, well, I'm going to go back and look, because there's already a move afoot to do streets this year, and then next year it's going to be about congestion relief. That's, I don't think, what people vote on.
Well,
that's off topic. I mean,
it depends on whether it's written, you know, as Director Cimolino said, it depends on how the ordinance was written and whether it allows pedestrian and or bicycle improvements as part of the eligible use for that tax.
Okay, well, thank you for bringing that up. Any of the director reports? Okay. All right, well, we'll adjourn the meeting at 3:43. I might be able to use those monies that are not dedicated